Hello again, Flow State Pod listeners. We are very grateful to host Kelli Yates, who is a fellow registered dietitian, on the podcast today, and she specializes in migraine and also gut health. We are really excited to explore because this is such an important topic and something that is so closely intertwined with our hormone health. And hearing about Kelli's specializations in both gut health and hormone health, I'm so excited to host and have this conversation today. Kelli, thank you so much for.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited to chat with y'all.
I'd love for you to dive in and start by just sharing a little bit about your story and how you got into this work. I think, all of us are sitting in the seats that we are because of our personal experiences. So we know that all good experts kind of start with their own personal experience. We'd love to hear yours.
Sure. Well, I became so interested in migraine because I have it myself. I've had migraine since childhood. The age, it started is kind of hard to exactly determine, but definitely, elementary school age. And it was kind of something that I always either just took over the counter meds to, push aside, or something that, I was just used to as part of my life, or something I didn't want to think about. And it wasn't until, I got older and into my 20s and started to become interested in, food and nutrition and all of that, that I kind of thought, like, maybe I could use this to help myself with migraine. And what I found just like blew my mind. So I had to specialize in it so I could help other people too.
What did your journey, what did it look like in terms of how are you supporting your symptoms before you discovered nutrition?
Yeah. NSAIDs, so Excedrin, ibuprofen, that was it. That's the only tool I had. And it worked pretty well, which honestly, I'm kind of fortunate for that. I mean, it didn't end up working out well for me, but for a lot of people, over-the-counter medications don't really work for their migraine attacks. So that's what I used until I literally could not anymore, because I had been taking those medications daily for a very long time. And as some people know, that can give you some major GI issues. So I developed a stomach ulcer, had to go cold turkey off of those meds and find something else.
Wow. Yeah, such a common, unfortunate kind of path, but I'm grateful if that has kind of led you into some deeper understanding. And was there like a moment or understanding for your own to identify specific triggers, or, that's in my understanding and practice is just seeing like what those specifics are for people, because there are so many.
Yeah. And, for a long time, like I think a lot of people do, I was pretty fixated on food and figuring out my food triggers. And that led me down a whole path of disordered eating and developing eating disorders, and just lots of food fear. So that's kind of the first, venture I took into trying to figure out triggers. But over time, I've learned that, rather than specific foods, and this is the case for a lot of people, but rather than specific foods, it's more about environmental issues. It's more about things happening internally. It's about whether I'm actually eating at all and eating, a balanced meal versus specific foods. So it's been a lot of trial and error. And unfortunately, that's just the nature of migraine, since everyone is so different with what impacts them. But, I'm probably 30 years into this process, and I'm just now feeling pretty good about it. So
Yeah, I was going to ask that, like, kind of where are you now question of managing this and even understanding how to support your body through this process, let alone helping others help to identify their own triggers. But kind of what is a typical, like, what are signs or things for folks that may not even know? People are like, oh, you have a headache, you have a migraine, don't really know the difference. Maybe we can zoom out and even start there. Like, what is a migraine attack versus a headache? How do you know you're experiencing a migraine?
Yeah, so a headache, and there are lots of different types of headaches. They can be severe, they can be debilitating. So I never want to minimize a headache condition. However, migraine attacks are much more than a headache or head pain. And some people with migraine, depending on what type they have, actually don't even experience head pain. So it can, encompass a lot of different symptoms, but probably the one that most people are familiar with is like a pretty significant headache that comes along with other symptoms like nausea, vomiting, light sensitivity. You can also have changes in your mood, like irritability. There's all kinds of, wild symptoms that can come along with migraine. But the takeaway is it's going to have things or symptoms associated with it other than, the headache itself. Or for people like with vestibular migraine, their main symptom is often some sort of dizziness or feeling off balance. There's hemiplegic migraine, which can mimic a stroke, which is pretty scary. So there's lots to talk about and think about when it comes to migraine.
What do you think that people most commonly like overlook when they're trying to diagnose this? Or what is something that you see people get confused on often? You mentioned, that the head pain is kind of what people think of, but what are some of the symptoms specifically that people don't associate specifically to migraine?
Yeah. So I'd say one thing that I see a lot of my clients have a lot of trouble with, that they kind of tend to blame themselves for more than like this is a part of migraine, is like the brain fog and cognitive issues that can come along with it. Because oftentimes people will have trouble with like finding the word they're trying to say, or they'll have really significant brain fog and it's hard to remember things. It's hard to, complete things at work or even around the house. And that can and often is a symptom of migraine. So, kind of relieving some of that pressure that people put on themselves to think like, oh, I'm not with it. My brain's not functioning. Like it's actually the migraine that's contributing to that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And would you say that you see this more commonly? And I'm assuming you work with men and women, but is there like a correlation to female and to the hormonal system? And what does that look like?
Yes. So migraine is thought to be much more common in women. We see it diagnosed much more commonly in women, and hormones do play a big part in that. Now, hormones, as far as we know, aren't the cause of migraine, but they can be a big contributor. So if you've ever heard the term like hormonal migraine or menstrual migraine before, that's someone, and it's really like a subtype of migraine, but it's someone who experiences flare-ups and attacks around certain points in their cycle, in their menstrual cycle. So those hormone fluctuations that, many women have, that men don't necessarily deal with in the same way, that can predispose us to struggling with migraine a lot more. And thyroid is also part of that too. I know that's hormones, but different hormones. But, a lot of thyroid conditions are much more common in women, and we see them happen alongside migraine pretty frequently too. So there's a lot of ties there.
Are you commonly seeing it occur for women in a specific phase of the cycle? I'd just be curious, for any of our listeners who are like, oh yeah, I get headaches, during this phase of my cycle. And like, could it potentially be migraine?
Yeah. So classic hormonal migraine is going to happen kind of in the few days before your period starts, and then sometimes a few days into your period. And then you can also experience it around ovulation or kind of a little bit after ovulation. Mm-hmm. It's really that they call it estrogen withdrawal. So it's the drop in estrogen that people experience that contributes to like fluid balance changes and all kinds of stuff that can trigger migraine attacks.
I was just reading an article this morning about how estrogen, like it really is the biohacking for females, especially as women lose estrogen as they age. And it's just like, I'm realizing the patterns, right? It truly is where a lot of symptoms pop up. And so maybe estrogen is like the missing wellness piece for a lot of us. Not that I'm saying we should like replace estrogen or anything like that, but it is an interesting thing.
I find too, when I share that with clients, that there's so much validation if they have been experiencing this, or they maybe have never put two and two together, just knowing that there is a pattern, like starting to have people track. And I would love for us to talk a little bit more about like, how do we help identify what these individual triggers are, understanding that they're so multifactorial. And I personally think that that's what the most challenging part of this work is like, it's not just, oh, my sleep was off last night, oh, I ate the gluten, or I was on my screen for too long. Like, it could be five different things, or it could be one thing, and then the next one could be a different trigger. So I just find so much validation for folks when I show them those fluctuations of hormones in their cycle. And correct me if I'm wrong, or in your experience, but even if hormones are, quote, normal, there are some individuals that are more sensitive to those shifts than others. Yeah, exactly. And I was going to say the overlap between PMDD is very similar. So, this topic of like hormone balance doesn't really exist. And you can have normal ranges and normal levels. How do we help people's bodies to understand or even predict? Like, we know this is going to happen, and we don't want to block that estrogen or those changes from happening because of all the beautiful benefits that we've talked about from estrogen, especially in regards to aging and our bone health, et cetera. But even giving people tools in their toolkit to prepare for that.
Yeah. And that is such a good point, because it can feel very frustrating when there's so many possible triggers. And especially if you are someone who's more like, your system is more sensitive, so it feels like everything is a trigger. It can be hard to feel like you can prepare appropriately for all of these different things, including hormone fluctuations. Because yes, even if your hormones are normal, you're still experiencing that estrogen dip, unless you're on birth control or menopause, something like that. So it can still impact you even if things are normal. Now, this is where I find it so helpful for people to, just for a little bit, but to shift their focus from triggers to like their overall resilience and raising their threshold for migraine, because that is really how you help your body become less sensitive to like normal stuff, right? Like normal hormone fluctuations, normal amounts of sunlight, like normal amounts of noise, those types of things. That's how you can reduce your sensitivity to triggers in the first place, which is a huge relief. And then it's easier to find those major triggers when the noise is kind of cut down,
What does that look like when you say like building resilience?
Yeah. So that is a big part of the work I do with my clients, because, I got so frustrated with triggers and trying to figure those out. And I was like, can we focus on something else, even just a little bit, So working on, foundational stuff like blood sugar balance and hydration, electrolyte status, sleep, like you mentioned, movement, all of those things, building a good foundation. And then thinking about stuff like your nervous system and your gut health, the gut-brain connection, hormones. So if there are any imbalances or anything kind of crazy looking, can we adjust that? And, there are other things like histamine and mitochondrial function. There's all kinds of things you can look into. But it's really about supporting whole body health, which is nice because then you benefit in ways outside of migraine. You actually just feel better overall. So it's my favorite way to approach this for most people.
Listeners, are you listening? It is the same across the board. No matter what you're dealing with, the foundations matter. Like, we just keep coming back to the basics, and we call them the basics, right? Because we're like living in this space and it feels like foundational things. Nourishing ourselves, hydrating, sleeping, circadian rhythm, I'm sure plays a role, blood sugar, like all these things. And it's like, it's so amazing how every time it's the same story, right?
Yeah,
and so
same
I love
starting place.
We're reiterating these foundations. And I was going to say there has to be a connection with blood sugar. I know I'm like headache prone, for sure. And I'm a highly sensitive individual. And I know that blood sugar is like a huge one. So that has to be something that you see with your clients often, right? Is just like undernourishing or on these roller coasters or eating, things that aren't helping them regulate their blood sugar.
Yeah, 100%. And it's really, people with migraine can have some unique challenges when it comes to everything, but especially like with blood sugar, because a lot of people, can't eat when they're dealing with a migraine attack, or when they're in their prodrome, which is the period before an attack starts. They might be dealing with a lot of nausea or low appetite, or, all types of symptoms that can affect their ability to eat. And there are a lot of people that have migraine attacks every single day, unfortunately. So that can really get in the way of regulated blood sugar. And then there's also, with food triggers, some people do become really anxious about avoiding any possible food trigger, to the point where they end up just not eating enough out of caution.
Yeah.
So that can happen, skipping breakfast, and then you're starving in the evening and you just eat anything. And then you don't get good sleep, and then the cycle continues. There's so many different things to look into, but it's a big factor for a lot of people. And it's a way you can get, relatively quick wins by just shifting some things around.
Would you say that there's typical, you mentioned food triggers, and that causing issues, but are there classic food triggers for migraine individuals?
This is a hot topic. Any
Okay,
food
let's do it.
really can be a trigger for migraine. There aren't technically any universal migraine trigger foods. You'll see lists online with certain foods. And, alcohol is a good example of a universal food trigger, right? Like if you drink past your,
is that a food?
It's not a food, but, or like caffeine, but those are technically like, chemicals. But when it comes to food, it really varies person to person. So I always recommend, especially if you're someone who has a history of like yo-yo dieting or chronic dieting or disordered eating, you're just like not feeling great about food, to focus much more on eating a balanced diet and, getting protein and veggies and all of that. And then tracking, if it feels, helpful, tracking your food, tracking your symptoms, and seeing if you notice any patterns there, rather than just like cutting out every food that you see on every list online. So that can be a lot.
Definitely. I'm kind of curious, because we've talked about the foundations, we've talked about identifying some of these triggers and symptoms, and I am curious if this kind of sounds overwhelming to people. Like, where do I even start? What is that kind of behind the scenes process? What is the first thing that you're helping people? And obviously being with them individually, I understand, is the most important piece in all of this, but what is that kind of step approach, if you can speak to that a bit?
Well, it absolutely can feel overwhelming, especially when you think about all the different factors. But usually I have my clients start with like getting more in touch with their body, with a little bit of mindset stuff, just so you're off to a good start. But also collecting data can be really helpful, so you have some info to use moving forward. So a lot of people with migraine are already keeping track of their attacks, their medication use. A lot of people do keep a food log and a symptom log. So just collecting data like that, figuring out where you're starting from, how many attacks are you having each month, can be good, a good baseline. And then focusing on eating regularly. So eating, 3 meals a day, 2 snacks a day, or whatever your body feels like it needs. Any 6 smaller meals a day, whatever works for people. But eating regularly, getting protein, fat, and carbs at each meal, just really focusing on those basic components of nourishing yourself, drinking water, drinking water throughout the day. Because I think a lot of times when people have a complex, just overwhelming condition like migraine, they're looking for those complex solutions because that makes sense. And so sometimes we forget the foundations. So really dialing things back and making sure you've got those covered is so important, even though it feels so basic a lot of the times. It can make a huge difference.
I definitely appreciate that. And I'm curious for these folks, like, do you always do testing between us talking about gut health, thyroid, even mineral status? Is that a part of everyone's plan, or starting with more of this kind of foundational work first and then seeing if they need that next level of information?
So it of course depends on the person, but I'd say maybe 40% of my clients end up doing testing, which is a way lower number than it used to be. But lab tests are, expensive, right? So they're not always a good initial solution for people or an initial tool for people. So I always say, like, if someone can't do lab testing, if you can't afford it, first of all, let's see what we can get from your doctor, and if we can get it covered. And because there's a lot of things we can do just with a blood test.
Totally.
But if we do, lab testing, it's usually because they've tried a lot of things already. Maybe they've worked with other people before and they just haven't gotten much success with the foundational stuff and, with supplements and medications and all the things. So it's usually kind of a midterm thing that we'll do is introducing lab testing. So yeah, it really depends on what each person needs and what they can afford.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that it's not like a blanket kind of recommendation, because I firmly believe that it's so individualized. And even with clients I work with from a GI and hormone standpoint, most often those foundational things that we start to do make the biggest difference. Like, the testing can be helpful, it can be validating if people have been told, everything is fine, and then we uncover some things or things are in suboptimal ranges, but it's not necessary for everyone. And I think that's really important. So I appreciate hearing.
Yeah, you can get progress without testing a lot of times, even if you end up doing it later. Don't let that hold you back from doing things.
I'm curious if the gut portion of your work kind of came as this connection, or if it was driven from the connection of so many people who experience migraine are using ibuprofen, and then that creates a gut problem. And so then you're having to work on gut to kind of counteract that. Is that kind of the connection, or is there just a greater gut migraine connection even beyond that?
So yes to both of those. A lot of people get into that cycle that I was stuck into, where you're, having to rely on medications that are destroying your gut, and then you got to figure that out. But there is also a huge, connection between the gut and the brain itself, even without all of that. And that's one of the things that really resonated with me when I first started, reading about migraine and what I could do for myself, is how important gut health is for your brain and for migraine. A lot of people with migraine also have IBS or other, GI issues. And even outside of a diagnosis, they might just have, constipation or, a lot of bloating or just like annoying issues. So that's kind of where those two kind of mesh together, and why it's such an important part of the work that I do, because they are so intertwined.
If someone is listening and they've been heavily relying on prescription drug or ibuprofen in their migraine journey, what advice could you give them as kind of like a baseline starting point if they're kind of wanting to stop utilizing that as their only option, and they're definitely feeling like their gut has been destroyed in the process?
So in my opinion, the first thing you need to do is get another option. So you don't want to take away your only medication and then have nothing, because all the natural stuff, all the food and the supplements and the lifestyle changes are huge and so helpful. But a lot of people with migraine still need meds, especially in the beginning, to deal with attacks. So speaking with your doctor, seeing if, like a triptan, which is a prescription migraine medication, see if that's a good option. There's lots of newer ones like CGRP inhibitors and those types of things. But getting an option that isn't going to continue destroying your stomach is like step 0. That's got to be done first.
Yeah.
We also want to consider that some people, and this was me too, but some people might be dealing with medication adaptation if they've been really relying on over-the-counter meds. So that's what happens when we take medication more frequently than it's intended to be taken for, a long-ish period of time. And then we kind of start to rely on that medication. So as soon as it wears off, the migraine attack comes back. So that's another thing that often your doctor can help you kind of get out of, because you got to stop the medication that started that process, and you're going to need a replacement for that to get out of it. So your doctor is a great resource to stop that stomach eroding the cycle that we can get in.
Yeah. And then is there like a first step for someone kind of healing that gut issue that they've created with the medication? What can be supportive in that area?
Yeah. So obviously stopping the medication with your doctor's help is huge, but
Right.
Making sure that you're supporting your gut health, especially your stomach, right? Because that's where a lot of this happens with like the NSAIDs, is the gastritis, the stomach irritation, even ulcers. So making sure that you're, incorporating things in your diet, maybe that can help support that. Lots of mucilaginous foods. That's so gross for people to hear, but things that support like mucus production within your intestines. Asparagus, okra. There's even teas like slippery elm tea. So those can be really helpful. Aloe vera can be really helpful for some people. And another big one is stress management, which I know is so annoying for people to hear, because everything, you got to manage your stress. But stress can really make GI stuff worse and harder to manage. So not forgetting about your mental health and doing things that bring you joy and hobbies, talking with friends, breath work, whatever floats your boat, that can actually help a lot too.
Yeah. Our last episode, we were recording on fertility, and like that being such a big topic too, or a recommendation of just like, oh, just manage your stress. And it's like, what does that even mean? Like, obviously we're all going to incur stress every single day. But it's so important in these processes as well. I want to step back to like medication management, because one, I never want people to feel judgment or stigma around taking medications. Like, I'm so grateful that these tools exist and that we have things for people. Like, people didn't always have access to things that might even bring them some type of symptom relief. So I always just want to like acknowledge that firstly.
Yeah. I take medication.
Second,
I take medication even with all the other stuff I do. So it's not a failure at all.
I appreciate you sharing that. Yeah, it can be a part of our toolkit, right? It's not, in my eyes, if we can have other things and we're not just relying on this thing and negating all of the other nutrition and lifestyle things that we can do to support our body and build that stress resilience, build your body's own response. But we also talk about, obviously, Maria is a foundational nutrition supplement, because we know that medications end up depleting a lot of our micronutrients. I also want us to just briefly touch on like that connection between nutrient deficiencies. We're talking about this medication, sometimes usage, impacting our stomach lining, which is also where the beginning of our digestion really, really begins. So if we can touch a little bit on that, I think folks will appreciate hearing that.
Yeah, like deficiencies and how they can kind of play a role in all of this. Yeah. One that, it is major, that if you do any research on migraine, you'll probably come across this, is magnesium. That's a huge one. Deficiencies are way more common than people realize, I think. And it's such an important part of our nervous system function. It's an important part of like our neurotransmitters and everything doing what they're supposed to do, and of our muscles being able to relax. It's an electrolyte. So magnesium is huge. A lot of us are deficient.
Also, there's a million different types of magnesium. When people are like, oh, just take magnesium. Like, I don't want to shit my brains out, but I also want this supportive tool. So no, seriously, like I was kind of challenging the first OB that I saw in my process, early pregnancy. I was challenged with sleep struggles. And she was like, oh, just take magnesium. And I was like, what kind? And she was like, oh, magnesium citrate is great. And I was like, you
You're
want
like,
me to poop?
My
Thank
pants
you.
everywhere.
Yeah. Like, yeah. And I even told her that I was a dietitian, that I was like, that is not actually helpful. So
Did you teach her?
yeah. Yeah.
Oh my God, amazing.
I also switched providers because not just for that reason alone, but anyway, there are a lot of different types of magnesium, but yes, I see magnesium being a huge source of deficiency and impacting so many things, not just for folks with migraine.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so important. I mean, for everything. So everyone and you can get magnesium from food too, right? You can get it from pumpkin seeds and spinach, and you just got to eat plants. You got to eat plant foods, and then you'll be getting these things. But if you do have a deficiency, sometimes you do need a supplement to get back to normal. Or, with migraine, a lot of times the dosages recommended are starting at 400 milligrams, if not, double, triple that for some people. And that can be hard to get from food. So supplements can totally be part of it. Some other deficiencies, B vitamins are huge. And B vitamins, again,
and the B vitamins are like huge for the serotonin uptake. So it's like, if you're deficient in the Bs, you're probably also getting a lot of the mood symptoms along with it.
Yes.
Just makes sense,
yeah,
right?
And serotonin plays a role in migraine too. So it's all connected. But yes, B vitamins.
And your serotonin's made in your gut. So your gut health is really important, and your gut signals to your thyroid. And
yeah. And then, the B vitamins play a huge role in the functioning of our mitochondria and, making energy from food. And especially when it comes to that process in the brain, if we have any, B vitamin deficiencies or, CoQ10 deficiencies, that can mean we're not getting enough, efficient energy production for our brain, which can then impact migraine, and energy levels and brain fog. So B vitamins are huge. I've seen these be especially helpful for my vestibular migraine clients. I like to call them out because sometimes they feel a little bit left out of the conversation. But B vitamins can be especially helpful for that population. But that's another big one, especially if you do have stomach issues, or if you're on acid reducers, that can affect B12. And so that's another good one to consider.
Speaking to mitochondrial health, and Monica, we were talking about COVID at the beginning of this episode. I would love for Kelli, you to just explain, like, what is mitochondrial health for people who are like, what the heck does that even mean? And for folks who have had long COVID or post-COVID and having a flare potentially in their migraine as well, and how those two relate.
Yeah, that is something that I see a good bit of, unfortunately, is, COVID impacting migraine long-term and other issues. But with mitochondrial function, that's essentially how efficiently your body can take food and turn it into fuel, like raw fuel that your body then, doing this, it requires energy, but there are a lot of steps within the mitochondria that are required to make energy. And there are things that can kind of, quote, go wrong within that process. It's like a little assembly line. So CoQ10, coenzyme Q10, it's another really popular supplement for migraine that is directly involved in mitochondrial function. And it is something that your body makes, and you're supposed to make enough of it, but some people don't, either due to genetic issues or, other things. And it can be hard to get from food. So that's where like that type of supplementation comes in. Same with B vitamins, those are involved in that process. But you can also do things like, if you're able to, exercising, because that can increase your number of mitochondria and increase their ability to create energy. So there are lots of things you can do to support that. And it can be really helpful, again, not only for migraine and those obvious symptoms like head pain, dizziness, but also for the brain fog and cognitive issues and fatigue. It can be so helpful for that too.
I'm curious, and you may have not like is there a connection between mitochondria? Like mitochondria is in our cells, right? So is it ultimately cellular health?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the cells
Yeah.
within your cells, or the
Ha-
little organs in your
Have you
cells.
have you heard much in terms of like phospholipid complex being supportive in that? Because I know like PC makes up our cells and our cell walls and makes them juicier. So would there be a connection with that?
That's not something I've looked a ton into. Nora, are you familiar with that and like
Okay.
how it could help?
I think that this is, I actually want to dig more into it, but we get so much of that from our diet already in
Okay.
oils that I don't think supplement is really necessary. And I'd so much rather
Mm,
someone be taking like ground flaxseed versus a
yeah.
supplement because of
Yeah.
so many other benefits that you're going to get from that. Again, it's a natural food source. That's my personal take without delving too far into the research quite yet. But
Yeah.
I think supporting that overall cellular health is going to be important for a million and one reasons. And knowing a lot of this just boils down to like antioxidants supporting that overall anti-inflammatory from a both dietary, lifestyle, and maybe supplement perspective. That's my take. I don't think we need to be taking
Yeah.
oil supplements, to be honest.
And we haven't even really talked about this, but I'm sure it plays a role, speaking of antioxidants, is just environmental toxins and
Mm-hmm.
what their role could be in migraine. And, I know a lot of people, and I know headaches and migraine is different, but, a lot of people from scents or fragrances, things like that can get triggered. So I'm curious, like there has to be a environmental toxin connection as well.
Yes. And, it can be on a few different levels, I guess. So you can have major sensitivity, sensitivity to fragrances. And
Yeah.
a lot of people with migraine do. I'd say probably most people do at some point with migraine.
Mm-hmm.
But you can even be sensitive to a natural fragrance like lavender. So, that's kind of a different story where our brain just can't handle all of that input. But as far as like environmental toxins, there can also be things, in your environment that are kind of lowering your threshold for migraine, so making you more susceptible to attacks. I know mold is like really popular and exciting right now, and that is something that can impact migraine. I mean, it definitely can. Even aside from like mold toxicity and mycotoxins and all of that, a mold allergy can impact migraine. It's pretty
Mm-hmm.
common. So if you're living in an environment
Mm,
or working in an environment that has mold or water damage or flooding or something, um, making sure that you're able to get out of that environment or address the mold in
Yeah.
some way can be helpful because that can really mess you up. Um, and as far as like cleaning products and candles and all of that goes, people with migraine do tend to handle like the natural stuff better, the simpler products better. But again, that's going to vary person to
yeah.
person. And I try not to overwhelm people too much with that kind of stuff because that
Yeah.
can be overwhelming, like trying to replace
Yes.
everything in your house. So I usually say that's more of like worry about that after
Mm-hmm.
eating, and drinking water and, all that stuff.
Yes.
But it can impact people for sure.
Sure, you also use this analogy, but I often explain things with the bucket analogy, where like what is contributing to your individualized, whether it's a stress bucket or in this case, some of these environmental triggers, like it might be a compound effect of a lot of these different things, and then what's tipping the bucket over. So that's why it's not like I can eat chocolate on this day, but then all of a sudden today it's bothering me. So, like, what gives? And dissecting all of these things that we've been talking about today apart and understanding that it might not just be that one thing, it can be a cumulative
Absolutely. And, I
bunch.
recognize that can, again, feel overwhelming. This can all feel so overwhelming because it's like, well, gosh, there's so many things in my bucket. But it can also be kind of a relief because it's not just one thing. You don't have to just find that one thing that's causing your
Yeah,
attacks. For most people,
exactly.
you can really start anywhere. You can start with food, you can start with drinking water, you can start with trying to move your body a little bit more, or eating fermented foods. Like, you can start somewhere, and you don't have to start with the perfect thing, so it kind of takes the pressure off.
Mm-hmm. And back to the like stress resilience and that you talked about in the very, very beginning is even helping our bodies to understand like we're not under attack or we're not being threatened by all of these things in the bucket can be instrumental so that even if you walk into a home of someone that has air fresheners plugged in, it's like, hey, body, this might feel stressful, but it's okay. This is super temporary. I can always go outside. I can do these things to help regulate my own nervous system and my response, as opposed to like, oh my God, I'm in this environment. I can't get out of here. I'm suffocating.
Exactly.
Like, knowing how much that spiral actually plays a role in potentially leading to an attack.
Yeah, 100%. That and anticipatory anxiety of like, am I going to encounter a trigger? Is it going to cause an attack?
Yeah.
Is it going to ruin my day? Like, that itself can cause so much stress, and it doesn't feel good. And it's also a hard cycle to break. So also having some
acknowledging both.
Also having some compassion for yourself about that is also huge.
I think you've shared so many amazing things today. I'm curious if you have, for anyone listening who's currently like in the deep of it, like just like fully feels like I'm so broken, I'm exhausted, I've been struggling with this. They've seen doctors and they've just been given the same answers over and over. What are some words of wisdom that you would give to that person?
Well, take a breath. First of all, take a breath. It's not that you're doing anything wrong. I'm constantly telling people this. You're not doing anything wrong. You have migraine. We just got to figure out what's going to work for you. And, it's not that you're causing it. We got to put that aside and, figure out, what does my body need? What does my body need right now? So kind of like we've been talking about, if you're frustrated and you're burned out and you've seen every doctor everywhere, like just kind of looking at your schedule right now, looking at your routine right now, what's literally one thing I can change that I know will help me? Because usually there is like one little thing, like I've been meaning to eat breakfast and I just don't, or I'm wanting to take a walk outside and I just don't. Like, what's that one little thing that you can start with and then go from there? Sometimes just like simplifying things and taking the pressure off for a little bit. Some of my clients call this like taking a doctor break. That can be really helpful, just to reset your system and feel a little bit less pressure, because it's not your fault. It's not your fault. You just haven't been able to figure out how to, support your body yet, and you'll get there. But yeah, taking the pressure off is huge.
Yeah. It's so often too that like we have the answers inside of ourselves, like exactly what you said, right? Ask yourself, what is the one thing that I think I can do that will be supportive? And oftentimes we have that answer inside of us, and we can just take that step and then reignite some trust in ourselves. And it's like a beautiful thing.
And make the goal smaller than you think it needs to be. So if you want to take a walk once a day, the goal is take a walk once a week or 3 times a week. So scale it back, lower the bar for yourself, because you're going to have bad days. And you want to be able to, work with those.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing with us. Where can our audience and our community find you?
The best place is on Instagram. I am the.migraine.dietitian. If you just search for that, I should come up. And then my website is the same, themigrainedietitian.com, no dots.
Thank you so very much, Kelli. We really appreciate this. And I hope it's just really validating for a lot of folks who are listening who experience this. And thank you for taking.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.